My presentation tonight, is about spiders and spiders that you can find near you, or if you go walking in your local open space, some spiders that you can find, and some handy tips for IDing and looking at their behavior and seeing, just their life histories. I only have 30 minutes to present, so I can't really talk about all the spiders of California, but I'll try to do my best to introduce the most common ones. And so spiders are found in almost all terrestrial environments in the world. They are very, very biodiverse and also vastly understudied. A lot about spiders is relatively unknown to us. We usually just make vast generalizations at the moment, but there is a whole field of research that has not been tapped yet. So I really encourage people who are really interested in natural history to maybe look into spiders, because there's a lot to learn from them. Spiders are a little bit challenging to ID because they have very, very small body parts, especially when you need to identify them down to the species. You probably need a microscope. You'll probably need to kill the spider and dissect their organs to get down to species. So that's why it's been very hard for taxonomists and biologists to research different species of spiders. And so a lot of their current knowledge of spiders is still relatively unknown. Spiders play huge ecological roles in our ecosystem. For the most part, most of them are predators, and so they eat other insects that maybe fly in the air, or they'll hunt for other insects or bugs that crawl on the ground. Some spiders are specialized to eat other spiders. And not only are they predators, but they're also prey for a lot of birds, especially birds that are looking for food in the wintertime. In the wintertime, a lot of insects, they actually cannot survive the wintertime. And so birds kind of switch their foraging to look for spiders instead to feed themselves. There are also some birds like hummingbirds that actually use spider silk to make their nest for their babies. So this is what the general spider looks like. You have 8 legs. What's really cool about these legs is that each of these legs has sensory hairs that detect vibration. So either when the spider is walking on the ground or on its web, it can feel vibrations in the ground and in its silk.
Shelly, do you mind if sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It might just be me, but I'm not seeing your slides. Does anyone else want to chime in on that? I got it. Now okay. It changed.
I think I know what's going on.
Okay.
This Zoom keeps on pausing my screen sharing for some strange reason, but I'll keep an eye on that and click on the button when it says that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Thanks. Where was I? 8 legs. Yes. Can detect lots of sensory input from their environment. Their legs also has claws used for grip, and also the legs also have combs on them to kind of draw out the silk that it makes to make its web. The spider also has 2 body segments. The first top half is called the cephalothorax. That is where it's a fusion between the head and the thorax. So you'll have the spider's eyes, and you'll also have its mouth, and where it also has fangs on this body part as well. And then the second half of its body segment is the abdomen, and this is where the spider's lungs are at, and also where it has spinnerets where the silk comes out of. And I also just want to highlight just how diverse these spiders are. If you look to the right, there is a little diagram of all of these different types of spider eye arrangements. You can see different families have slightly different eye arrangements. And if you get up close to a spider, get a good look at its head and try to see how its eyes are arranged, and it can get you kind of close to what family it is. And these are some spiders lookalikes. These are really close relatives to spiders, but they're not actually spiders that we might see. Starting from the very small, we have ticks that suck our blood, and some species carry Lyme disease. We have harvestmen, which are commonly mistaken for spiders, but you kind of find them on the forest floor with their floppy legs walking around. These are not spiders because you can see they only have one body segment compared to the two body segments found in spiders. On the right, we seem to have this little mite-looking thing with little miniature pincers, and this is a Pseudoscorpion. And you can find these in shrubs and trees. They're really, really small, like 1 to 2 millimeters. And they look really awesome when you find them because you're not expecting something so small to have pincers. And then we have our bigger scorpion, who looks like a pseudoscorpion, but will have a tail with a stinger at the end. And lastly, we might see mites. Mites are, for the most part, microscopic. And so we can't really see them with the naked eye, but we can look for their structures that they make when they live on or in plants. And what I'm not covering are all the other arachnids like the whip scorpions and the vinegaroons and the solifuges. Many of these species don't really live in North America. They're mainly centralized in the tropics or in other areas, so I'm not going to go too much into them.
Shelly, our question about our daddy longlegs harvestmen, are those the same?
Ooh, yeah, it really depends on where in the country you grew up in. For the most part, I learned that daddy longlegs were the cellar spiders, which I'll cover, and that the harvestmen were these. But I know if some people that grew up in the South, like they say daddy longlegs are harvestmen. So yeah, it really depends where you grew up and who taught you what was a daddy longleg.
I'm just kidding. Sorry, I wanted to link, Karan has a blog post about this issue. I think he might be on this call, but he's a great resource for invertebrate knowledge, and I just linked to his blog, and it's a great description of this distinction.
Yeah. And a little highlight, a preview to Mirav's presentation is that scorpions actually glow under UV light, but we'll learn more about that later. So back to spiders. We all know, it's common knowledge that spiders make silk and they build webs, but what a lot of people don't know is that there are actually different types of silk that spiders can make. And depending on the function, they can create these different types of silk. For the most part, like the structural silk is the one where you see spiders making these really thick, long cables to anchor their webs on. Or if like a spider is running away and jumping off a branch, you'll see that it leaves like a piece of silk thread behind so that it can like rappel downwards. So that's known as dragline silk. If it wants to anchor that dragline, it will create silk that it acts like cement to anchor it down. And for orb weavers especially, they can create this special type of silk that is actually sticky. Sticky enough so that small prey like insects, flying insects can get trapped and stuck in the web. And then they also make different types of silk, especially the females when they're laying eggs, they want to swathe their eggs in like a nice soft inner silk and then a tough outer silk to protect the eggs. Ooh, another way that spiders use silk is for transportation. So spiders are known to balloon, and this is when a spider releases silk into the air when it's kind of windy, and then it will just float away and drift away into the air, like so, and it goes away. Kind of want to replay that for a second, just because you can see that the spider is lifting its legs in the air, and that is because it's trying to sense the wind, trying to see like how fast is it moving, is it the right current, is it the right speed, is it where it wants to go, and then it will release its balloon silk, and then it will get dragged away by the wind and going to somewhere else. A lot of baby spiders, once they've hatched, they will do this just so that they can disperse to other areas. A lot of spiders that don't make webs, like our jumping spiders and our crab spiders, also do this, especially if they're on a flower and they don't see any more insects to eat. They'll probably balloon themselves to go to another place to hunt. So now I'm going to go over maybe about 13 different types of common spiders you might find around the Bay Area. Some of them, they're pretty easy to find around your home, and some of them you kind of have to take a hike and walk into the woods and look down and see what you can find. I've divided this into several categories. I'm going to first talk about like the spiders that make webs, and I'll show you a few different types of webs and highlight some of the families that make these webs. And then I'm going to go to talk about spiders that live in burrows, and so they'll actually dig a burrow for themselves, and they will probably live in that burrow for most of its life. And then finally, I'll talk about the spiders that we don't see make visible webs or visible burrows, and that we see them running around, hunting and doing other things. So the first one is what I generally call the under debris webs. So these are the webs that you find if you turn over a log, if you peer into like the cracks of a crevice. Sometimes if your house walls has a lot of cracks in it, you might see these spiders in between the cracks, and you might see some loose webs draped over the walls or the bark or the rocks. And yeah, I had a very hard time finding photos of these spiders because they're really, really shy and really, really hard to find. But we do see many in California, like the Hackle-Mash Weaver. My second type of web I want to introduce is the sheet web. So these kind of look like blankets. So if you ever think about going out to a grassland, or if you even look at a bush, you will find these sheets, these blankets of silk that either cover the bush or cover an area of grass. And one of the families that makes these sheet webs is called the money spider. My spider biology professor was Scottish, and so she taught me European folklore, saying that the reason why money spiders are called money spiders is because it is believed that if a money spider climbs onto you, it is thought that it is making new clothes for you. And so that is a sign that wealth is coming your way. So these money spiders are good luck in Europe. Third type of web is the orb web. This is your charismatic, when you read Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, this is what the web that the spider makes. I think everyone is familiar and has seen this type of web before. It's circular, and it's usually out in the open where everyone can see, and it has like a nice area, and it looks kind of transparent so that flying insects can't really see through them, and they'll accidentally get stuck in the web. And we have some orb weavers that get really big in September, the females. The banded garden spider is pretty popular, pretty populous around here. So is the trashline orb weaver, which it's really hard to see because it has camouflaged itself on the right-hand side. In the middle of its web, you can see like there is a line of trash. That's usually discarded prey that the spider wraps up and then arranges them in a line. And scientists believe that this is how this spider camouflages itself against birds. So birds are always looking for spiders to eat, but if you disguise yourself to look like a bird dropping, they probably might fool the birds into thinking that there's no one there. I have a video of a cross orb weaver, and we can see that in its web, a fly has been trapped, and it quickly feels the shaking of the web, and then it bites its prey to paralyze it, and then you can see that it is swathing this fly with its swathing silk to wrap it up and mummify it, and to like keep it for later. It's kind of like saran wrap. And then it uses its fangs to kind of drink up the fluids of the fly. Our fourth type of web is the funnel web. And funnel webs are made by a few different families of spiders, but the most common ones are the tube web weavers. You'll probably find these are very common. They either are found in holes in trees, or if you like have a brick wall in your house and there's a little crack, you'll probably see these webs being made in your brick wall outside. You can tell that this is a funnel web weaver. Funnel web weavers look brown, and they're pretty hard to identify if you only go by color alone. But these spiders are pretty unique in that when they're at rest, they will have their first 3 pairs of legs pointed forward and only their 4th pairs of legs pointed backwards. So that is one cool way to identify a tube web weaver. So this is a type of funnel web that you'll find kind of on a vertical surface. The next slide, these are funnel webs that you find on the ground. So grass spiders, these agelenids, they build these big sheets out in the grass in the sunny meadow, and you will see these sheets and you'll kind of follow them to like this opening in the center, off center, and that's usually where the spider will be. And what's really cool is that you can kind of see how these spiders are very adapted to eat certain types of prey. Many people think that, oh, all spiders eat all different types, all the same insects, but actually spiders have evolved to eat certain types of insects. So for example, this spider, since its web is on the ground, it's probably not going to catch any flying insects. Instead, it's going to look for like the crickets that are jumping around that might accidentally get tangled up in this horizontal web. The 5th web that I want to introduce is the tangle web, also known as the cobweb. To the human eye, it looks very messy, but there is an order to this madness. Many different families of spiders make this type of web because it is very space efficient. If you have like a corner, or if you have an area that has like a good void, you can just fill this area with your silk and create a very quote unquote messy web that if an insect accidentally gets trapped into it, it has a hard time trying to get out of it. And then I know there's a huge diverse amount of spiders that make this type of web, but I want to just highlight two of them. We have our very, very charismatic black widow. She is a beauty. She is jet black with the red hourglass shape on her abdomen. And then to our right, we have another cobweb builder, which is the Cellar Spider. And this is what I learned as a kid, that this was a daddy long legs, but some other people say that they learned the harvestman was a daddy long legs. But yeah, I think it's really cool on how like language is taught differently in different regions of the United States. Now onto the spiders that make burrows. And so I think in most urban areas, it's pretty hard to find spiders with burrows. You probably have to go somewhere either in a wooded area or like out to the grasslands and the foothills to find these. Anyone who has a different observation, please let me know. So first we have tarantulas in California. They are really, really big and really, really hairy. And they are a really special sight to see, especially in October. Usually tarantulas spend their entire lives living in a burrow that they excavate in the ground. Tarantulas are one of the longest living spiders. I think the female spiders can live up to a couple of decades, while the male spiders of the tarantulas live a little bit less than that. But in October, it's the time where the males will look for the female burrow. So he will actually come out of his burrow and basically wander the grasslands and wander the hiking trails in search of a female that he can mate with. And yeah, they're pretty common on the East Bay Hills. If you have time to go to any of the parks up there, or even in South San Jose, they're probably still walking around, but it's kind of the end of their season right now, so there might not be that many of them right now. Ooh, and our next burrowing spider is the turret spider. So these are found in like the shaded woodlands. Usually it's very damp and very moist, and you'll probably see this turret structure coming out of the ground. It's lined with debris like leaves and maybe some pebbles, and depending on what the spider feels like, it will decorate its turret with. Here is a cool video clip that I can play several times, but basically this turret actually has what do you call those? Trip lines that the spider can actually feel the vibrations of when an insect is walking on it. And it can quickly pop its head out of its burrow and quickly grab the insect and take it in to eat. Wahaha. Yeah. I think these are really cool spiders because you find them everywhere on the hiking trails. Ooh, we also have trapdoor spiders. There's actually about 2 to 3 families of trapdoor spiders that live in the Bay Area. You really can't see them because their trapdoor is actually weirdly camouflaged. So on the left, one of Murav's photos here, you really can't see anything in this pile of moss that's growing around, but you can kind of see there's like some evidence of some silk coming from this burrow. And if you lift it up, there is a burrow that is lined with silk and a trapdoor spider is living in it. And this is another type of trapdoor spider, but you can kind of see again, it can sense the insect because it has these trip lines that the insect kind of breaks, that the spider knows that the insect is close by. And it quickly snags it and takes it back into its burrow to eat. The last group of spiders that I want to go over are the wanderers and runners. So these are spiders that you'll probably see not on the web. They'll probably be wandering around, either doing hunting or looking for other things. These spiders do have the ability to make silk, and so they will make retreats for themselves, but they're not necessarily considered webs because they're not using their silk to capture prey, if that makes sense. They're using it to kind of shelter themselves from the weather. So first we have our wolf spiders, and they are really adorable and they get really big. But what is really cool about them is that the female wolf spider will actually take care of her eggs, and her young, when they hatch, will actually stay on her abdomen until they are big enough to wander on their own. Wolf spiders are very common. I believe they're like one of the most diverse families of spiders in the world. And so it's very hard to identify them to species. Next free living spider we have is the crab spider, and they are very well disguised. So that unsuspecting pollinators that land on flowers don't know that it's there. And so they kind of lay in wait. They extend their arms out and then wait until the unsuspecting fly gets close, and then they jump and ambush it and sink their fangs deep inside the fly, and then they get a juicy snack that way. Really fast.
I guess it's a good question to ask. A question in the chat: do spiders drink water, or do they get enough fluids from the insects they eat?
Yeah, my experience comes with raising spiders. They, for the most part, do get enough moisture from the insects that they eat. However, it is also a good idea to kind of keep a damp cotton ball in their enclosure. So to kind of keep their enclosure nice and humid, because a lot of spiders, they kind of need that damp environment to feel comfortable. And some spiders do use that cotton ball to drink water out of. Hopefully that answers your question.
Nice, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was one more question too, and there's actually two questions now. The first was, do we have money spiders in California? And the second was, do spiders eat ladybugs?
Okay, do we have money spiders in California? Yes, we do. We have a few native species and a few species that were introduced here. And what was the second question, Kathleen?
Do spiders eat ladybugs?
Yes, they do. I think my final slide are the last type of spider that I'll talk about are the jumping spiders. And I think these are like one of the most charismatic spiders that have actually made it mainstream and have kind of been the gateway spider for people to not think that spiders are super scary, because they look very similar to us. They have these big beady eyes that are staring straight at us, and they actually behave in a very cat-like manner. I was talking about other spiders using webs to sense for vibrations, but jumping spiders are really unique in that they use their eyes a lot to detect prey and to detect light. And so they'll actually use their eyes to hunt for things. And so there's this one spider clip of this spider just playing or hunting for, hunting at a laser pointer, kind of like a cat. I think it's super adorable. There's also a few genuses of these jumping spiders that live in California that actually mimic ants. And the photo on the lower right looks like an ant. It even has like the skinny waist of an ant, but it is actually a jumping spider. And I have a little clip of it trying to even act like an ant as well. So this spider has 8 legs, but ants only have 6. So what it does is that it kind of pretends that its first legs are antennae. So it will actually try to mimic the ant and kind of pretend that its first legs are antennae and kind of tap the ground just like an ant would. And it would try to mimic how an ant would walk as well. All right. And this concludes the end of my presentation. Stay tuned to learn how to find spiders and other night creatures from Merav. Thank you for listening. I have 2 resources, 2 books that I want to recommend. The Field Guide to Spiders of California and the Pacific Coast States is a great resource if you just want to get your feet wet in trying to identify spiders in the field, especially if you're wanting to take a hike around California. This is a great resource. And also if you want to learn about more about spider behavior and more about their life histories, this book by Marie Elizabeth Herberstein, she goes into great detail, or she created this review that goes into great detail about what we know so far about spiders. All right, Hannah, that wraps up my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelly. Those videos are so cool. Let's see if we have any more questions for Shelly right now. You can also ask her questions after Marav's presentation, but before we move on, anybody else have any questions to put in the chat?
Hannah, my husband came up with a good question.
Okay.
Which, do the ant mimic ants so they can like hide in their ranks and eat them?
It depends on what genus it is. I'm not a resident expert, but I know that one genus of spiders that mimics ants does it because it doesn't want to get eaten by these ants. So a lot of ants, they're very, very aggressive and very territorial, and they'll probably gang up on these spiders. So the spider has adapted to kind of coexist with them by trying to pretend it's an ant so that it doesn't get eaten by them.
Fascinating. That was great. Thanks.
So they can acquire them.
Shelly, there's one more. Do we know of any non-carnivorous spiders?
Yes. There is one species of spider that lives in the tropics who scientists definitely believe is vegan. It lives on one species of tree. I think it's an acacia tree that this tree secretes nectar from its from like specialized plant nodes that kind of give the spider the nutrients that it needs. But they're only found in the tropics. However, there have been accounts that certain jumping spiders here and certain crab spiders here, that they'll actually eat pollen from blooming flowers to supplement their diet of insects as well.
And Karan has added to the chat that there's a Bagheera Kiplingi jumping spider in Central America that's mostly herbivorous too. So thanks.
Ooh, nice.
Okay, there's more coming in. People are curious. We've got one that says from Marcus, do spiders eat daddy long legs?
Ooh, actually, wait. Which daddy longlegs is he referring to? The harvestman or the cellar spider?
I meant like the ones you commonly find in the house. I read in a book they're not spiders, actually. They're a different class of insects.
Oh.
Non-insects.
So the daddy longlegs that you find in your house are actually spiders that eat other spiders. So they're a specialized type of spider that will eat other spiders that it finds.
But I think you don't find harvestmen in your house very often, Marcus. So I think what you're thinking about as a daddy longlegs is a harvestman that isn't a spider. But they're mostly detritus eaters, aren't they, Shelley, the harvestmen?
Yes, the harvestmen are usually detritus eaters.
But
So
the
they
ones-
could get eaten by another spider,
Yeah.
not another spider, since they aren't spiders.
But the ones we have in our house are spiders because they have two segments.
Yeah, they're the cellar spiders.
They're cellar spiders.
Yeah, so the cellar spiders are actually spiders that eat other spiders, which I think is really cool.
Okay, we got a question from Valerie. How do the burrowing spiders make their own holes?
I believe they dig their own holes. And usually when they're small, when they start out as babies, they will have a small hole. And as they grow bigger, they'll just make their hole a little bit bigger. And over time, their hole gradually gets to the size of a fully formed adult.
May I chime in on this one?
Yes.
I actually witnessed a Kalisova spider digging, and they are fast and they can dig from in solid soil, clay-like soil. It was amazing. They just, good grief, it's going down. How this happened was we volunteers turned over a rock and there was one underneath and they started teasing. I said, leave it alone. And the thing turned around and down it went.
Very cool. All right. So I think we're going to leave the Q&A for now. And of course, you can ask Shelley more questions, both Shelley and Merav, questions at the end. But let's move on to Merav's presentation.
Okay, so now that we learned so much about spiders, let's go for a little night hike, which is something we used to do when life was, normal. And we did our things, which one of them is going on night hikes in the Santa Cruz Mountains and with some of the people that are here on this presentation. So this is kind of fun. And when you go on a night hike, then usually you start just before it gets dark and you see different things. And then we usually have dinner when it's just getting dark and we wait till it gets really dark so we can use our flashlights and go out looking for things. And we use a red flashlight, like a regular flashlight, basically with a red tape on it so that we won't get our eyes too, tired from the bright white light. And we also use UV light, which we'll get to in a minute. And we never know what we'll find. So sometimes we actually don't see much, but usually we see these guys, camel crickets. And sometimes we'll see dozens of them. And, if you don't look closely, they don't look like much, little hopping insect. But if you do look closely at them, they're just fascinating. They have beautiful colors. By the way, I'm not going to talk too much about each of these organisms, but if you have questions, maybe you could talk about it at the end, or if you have something that is really important, you could write it in the chat and I could try and address that. But I'm mostly going to show you lots of different things, like to show you the diversity of organisms that we might encounter on a night hike. So one group is the camel crickets. And like many of the other organisms that we'll see, during the day, they hide under logs or rocks or even in the leaf litter. And at night, they'll go out. Some of them go out to eat So if they're predators or herbivores or whatever, they go out to eat, and some of them go out looking for a mate, trying to reproduce. Another cool organism we might see is its relative, the Jerusalem cricket. It's also called a potato bug. It's not a potato or a bug. It didn't come from Jerusalem, and it's not a cricket, but it's a really awesome insect. And you can see that they're pretty large. I mean, it's difficult to tell from the photo, obviously, but it's a pretty large insect. You usually don't see them during the day, but you might, saw them hiking somewhere. They have these long antennae, kind of small eyes, and really big mandibles, big jaws. So they could bite you if you try to handle them, but they're usually not predators. They eat all sorts of decaying material, but they would eat other insects as well. And if you go out at night, you'll probably hear some crickets. And even if you go out, like if I go out on the sidewalk in my neighborhood, I'll probably hear many different crickets, like this tropical house cricket, which is very common in my neighborhood. And we've got here both a female and a male. So the female has this long ovipositor to lay its eggs in moist soil. And the male has these short wings here. And that's how they produce sound. That's how they sing their songs. And the female are supposed to be attracted to that. Females don't produce any kind of song, which is interesting. And the other interesting thing is that they hear, so they have a special hearing organ, unlike the Jerusalem cricket, for example, which is in the foot, in the front leg, I think. Very cool. And yeah, this is one of these crickets that I found right on the sidewalk near my home. And it was sharing a meal with a big slug, a cellar slug, and some ants. And this is what they sound like at night. And I love that. If it wasn't too smoky outside, I'd open the door and you might hear them as well. But, oh, I don't know if you could hear that from the presentation. I think not. Another organism that you could maybe see on a night hike in the Bay Area, it's more common in Death Valley, in the desert where I teach a class. So they are attracted to light, and sometimes if we put moth light at night, we might get adult antlions. The larva is really exciting. They look like this, nothing like the adult, because they go through a complete metamorphosis like butterflies and beetles and ants. So from an egg, they develop into a larva that feeds on insects in this case. And then after a few larval stages, they will transform into a pupa stage, which doesn't feed. And from the pupa, we'll get the adult. And you can see that they have this bizarre shape. The only one that makes this funnel, so what they do is they live in kind of sandy soil, and they'll make a little funnel. I asked my daughter to make some cartoons for my presentation. So they make a little funnel of sand, and then they sit in the bottom of this pit, waiting for a little insect to fall down. And the shape is actually very sophisticated. It just looks like a little hole in the ground, but it's actually pretty sophisticated because like they sort the soil particle by size and to create the effect that they get. And then they sit down there with these huge mandibles. Look at that, waiting for an insect to fall down. And then they will catch it and purse it and then suck everything out. So yeah, really cute little larva. I mean, just like so many of these insects and other arthropods, if you take a closer look, you kind of get a better understanding of sci-fi movies and where they get their ideas from, because they're so awesome. Okay, and then another group of insects we might see at night are beetles. Many different kinds of beetles from different families. I mean, beetles is the largest group of insects or organisms in general. they're very diverse, and there are many different families. So they go out at night, again, looking for food or for a mate. Some of the carnivorous beetles, like this ground beetle, are looking for snails and slugs and other things. And then some are herbivores, like the weevils that go out at night on this coffee berry. So if you notice little feeding marks on coffee berries, I found out it's the weevils. They make that. So anyway, lots of different beetles, and some of them are specialized, and we'll get back to them. Another huge group that goes out at night is the moth. So moth belong to the same order as butterflies, but they are mostly active at night. Some of the caterpillars are active at night as well, like this tiger moth larva that you could see walking on the trails and on trees. And they could get pretty large, and they have their cute little coats, so they're very fluffy. And then the adult moth, they go out flying, looking for a mate, but many of them also feed on flowers. So specialized flowers attract moth specifically. So they'll have bright colors, or more like whitish to yellowish colors to attract moth at night. And they'll probably have a strong smell, sweet smell, to attract the moth at night. So they feed on nectar at night. And then my favorite group, ants. So I'm an entomologist and I study ants. So I'm always excited when we see ants in night hike. And one group that we often see is the carpenter ants. These are the largest ants you see around. This one is actually a queen. So there's the queen here and a worker carpenter ant. And then we also see sometimes the black harvester ant, which is active during the day. So carpenter ants are mostly active at night. The harvester ant, on the other hand, is active when it's nice. So if it's not too hot, they'll be active during the day as well. But on a hot day, they'll just go back to the nest, watch TV or whatever they do inside, and wait till the conditions outside are better. And then they might be out, like we saw them in Santa Cruz Mountains at 10:30 p.m., still out doing their things. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll see a specialized cockroach that lives, it's a Myrmecophilus cockroach, which means that it likes ants, and they live inside their nest, hiding from the ants with chemical defense. But that's a long talk. Anyway, you might see them, or other creatures that are associated with ant nests. And then another favorite group is the millipedes. So millipedes are these really awesome, kind of long arthropods. They're not insects. They are different kind of arthropods. And many of them go out at night, like this Tilobulus, which is one of our common genera in the area. Millipedes have very round body shape with many, many legs. And from each one of their body segment, they have 2 pairs of legs coming out. Unlike centipedes, which is our next slide, millipedes are herbivores and they eat all sorts of decaying plant material mostly. And they don't bite, they don't have any venom. Instead, if you try to handle them and are not happy about it, they might secrete some chemical compounds that are kind of smelly, or they might poop on you, which is also an option. But it's kind of worth it because they're so cute. Sorry about that. Anyway, our second group is next group is centipedes. So centipedes are closely related to millipedes, but they have much more flattened body shape. And from each one of the segments, they have 1 pair of legs coming out. Some millipedes are also kind of flat. We have the flat back millipedes, but they're different than these centipedes. Centipedes usually run very fast and they're venomous. They have venom coming out from specialized jaws right next to their face. So you could see these are the antennae. This is the head, and it's kind of difficult to see in this photo, but these are the maxillipeds, specialized legs that they use to inject venom. If you do try to handle them, which I don't know why you would, but if you do try that, they might bite, and that should be very painful because they have venom. But they're really awesome. This is the common desert centipede, which is pretty common and comes in different colors. So they are sometimes pretty colorful and very, very beautiful creature, but they run very fast and they do bite.
Sorry, Marav, we have 2 questions.
Yes.
Okay, well, I have a
please.
question. Can you, what is the name of the specialized legs?
It's called Maxillipeds,
Okay.
from maxilla, and
Mhm.
peds is the legs.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And nice. And then can millipedes have more than 80 legs? Is there a maximum amount of legs?
Oh, I never tried to count them. There are all sorts of songs about the millipedes taking off their shoes, or putting their shoes on and stuff. They could have many legs. I'm not sure how many. I'm sure it's written somewhere. So, but otherwise we could count. I'll try and find out. So other critters that come out at night are snails and slugs. And even in San Jose, where I live, because people irrigate their gardens at night, you might see snails and slugs active on the sidewalk looking for something to eat. So most of them eat some plant material, and we already met some of their predators, and we'll meet a few more. Yeah, snails are really cool, even though this one is a non-native, the garden snail, which is super common and highly invasive. But it's not just the invertebrate that go out at night. We have some really cool vertebrates that we might find when we go for a night hike. So some of our favorites are the amphibians. And we might see a California slender salamander, which might look to you like an earthworm, because they kind of look like an earthworm. But if you look closely, you see tiny, tiny eyes and tiny, tiny, tiny legs. And these are amphibians. We also have arboreal salamander, and we have newts, a few different species of newts that you might see at night, especially if it's kind of wet, if it's winter and we already had some rain, then these critters might be more active. During the day, just like the invertebrates, they hide under logs and rocks and buried in the ground. And after the first rains, they'll start being more active, looking for food. And newts especially migrate to water source like creeks and ponds, and to reproduce there. So we'll see them starting that activity around December till April or May. And then if we get to a nice pond in a well-protected place, we might find the California red-legged frog, which is one of our endangered species. And we might see some Syrian tree frogs calling. So frogs, especially, when they try to find a mate, the male will call for a female, and we'll try and listen for that in a second. If we got to a nice pond, we might also see garter snakes, aquatic garter snakes, active during the day, but also during the night, and we might see them swimming in the pond. So I will stop sharing and then start sharing right again. Let's do that quickly. Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask a
Sure.
quick question? Yeah, that's in
Yes.
the box, which is that are house centipedes poisonous? And I'm fairly certain they're not actually centipedes, but I'll let you take it from there.
So the problem with common names, as we probably found out in the previous presentation, is that different people might refer to different organisms using the same name. So house centipede is usually, as far as I know, is a centipede that has these really, really long legs. They might also be called daddy long legs sometimes. And they run super fast. And they're not very common around here. You might have them at home. I saw them only once in the Bay Area while camping. Like other centipedes, I guess they are venomous, but they shouldn't be highly venomous. They might be even too small to bite. So to get through the human skin, that's not that easy for a little critter. So only some animals could do it. Even most spiders won't be able to bite you. Not that they would want to. Most spiders would never even try to bite you. But even if they would try, they probably won't succeed because the skin is too thick for them. Okay, hopefully that answered the question. And now let's listen to some frogs, because this is really exciting. If my computer will allow us to do that. Yes, please. Okay. Are you ready for the red-legged frog? Yeah? Can you hear it? Yes.
It's been cooperative.
So they could get really loud. And I've got another one, but I might need to do it again. Sorry, I will just do this a couple of times. So yeah, this is our next one. No, we already saw you. Okay. Yes. Okay. Can you see a cute tree frog? Yes? Awesome. So this cute thing is a male Sierran tree frog calling for a female. I'll just play it one more time and then we'll get back to the presentation. I think it's awesome. I hope you enjoyed it too. Okay, now I'll share my presentation without optimizing it for video, blah, blah, blah. So let's get back here. Awesome. Okay, yeah, so male frogs call at night for a female. And by doing so, they obviously expose themselves to the predators, like snakes and other critters that might be out there. But, you know, males do weird things. This is a cool story that we noticed one time while on a night hike in Montebello in Santa Cruz Mountains. We saw this western skink. So skink, like most lizards, are actually active during the day. They are diurnal animals. But we saw this skink and we, you know, took some photos and stuff. We noticed that it was missing its tail, which was interesting. And then we noticed that there's someone else involved here. So I don't know if you could see, but there's another reptile in the photo. Right in the middle of the circle, there's a little head popping out. And this is a California king snake that was there as well. And we think maybe it got the skink tail. So skink, like some other lizards, might lose their tail in order to lose a predator. And maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. We didn't wait to find out, but it was pretty awesome to find these two guys, or ladies. And then Claire, this one is for you. This is Claire's friend from one of our trips to Death Valley. So some birds are active at night, like owls, and like this common poorwill, which is not an owl, but it's a beautiful bird that is also active during the day and feeds on insects and other little animals. And it's fluffy and cute, almost like Claire's knitting kit that was under her tent, and she thought it was her knitting kit, but it was a poorwill that stayed there for a few hours, long enough for us to take some photos. Some other animals you might see at night are bats. The problem with bats, though, is that it's difficult to see them. But if you are going out camping or on a night hike, and especially if you're near a pond, you might see them flying just before it gets completely dark. We often see them, and it's just so beautiful when you notice that these are not small birds, these are bats. And the bats we have in the area are all feeding on insects, and they're pretty small. And I have to tell you a little story about bats. A few years ago, I was hiking in Coyote Valley with a friend, and we walked under one of the bridges, and she noticed that there was guano on the ground. So we looked up on the bridge, so this is the bridge, and we noticed that there's something in, you know, bridges here have these holes underneath, and we noticed that there was something inside, but we weren't sure exactly what it was. So some Photoshop work later, we found out that there was like a whole bunch of bats sleeping inside, or I don't know, they look kind of awake to me, but they were living there under the bridge and they were just so cute. So yeah, bats are awesome. And let me try and play you something else. So, you know, how I said it's difficult to see the bats, and we can't actually hear most species of bats, even though they are very loud to other bats, we can't actually hear them. But what we can do is we can use a bat detector to try and, you know, see what they're up to. So let me try and play this. Come on. My computer is a bit confused about this whole thing. Ah, yes, it's back. Okay, so this is just like a recording from my phone. You might not be able to hear it, but this is a little bat detector gadget that you could plug to your smartphone, and then you could listen to bats. So yeah, I don't know if you could hear it, but it also translates the sound to something we can hear, which sounds kind of cute. But anyway, you could listen to a bat using this thing, and it also would try and identify which bat you found, because different bats have different calls. And even though this is not perfect, like a real bat expert could look at these calls and identify them to species, which is awesome, because otherwise it's a whole diversity we can't see. And I think there are 27 species of bats in California, which is amazing. And most of them you could see in the Bay Area, or you can't see, but they live here. The next thing I'd like to talk about is ultraviolet fluorescence, which is very exciting. So when we go out using our red light, it would be very difficult to find something that looks like that, right? A scorpion, because it kind of blends in very well with its environment. But if we use a UV light, then it just pops out so beautifully, because they fluoresce in kind of greenish light. And this is actually how it looks like with these specific colors. So the background usually looks dark, and then the scorpion will kind of pop out. And sometimes when we go on a night hike in the Santa Cruz Mountains, we might see one, you know, when we enter the forest habitat, we might see a scorpion or two, and sometimes we'd see dozens of them in one night hike. And it's just so interesting, so cool when you could see them. And often they'll be hiding in little burrows in the ground, or they'll just be out there looking for food. Another arachnid, so scorpions are arachnids, just like spiders. They belong to a different order of arachnids, and we have a few other orders that sometimes would fluoresce, not as nicely as scorpions do, but this harvestman, you know, is kind of nice. In the tropics, like everything else, they look much nicer. But even in the Bay Area, that's pretty cool. Another cool arachnid that Shelly only mentioned, but we didn't see it earlier, this is the sun spider or wind scorpion, or I don't know, they have a whole bunch of weird common names. And we sometimes see them in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and they fluoresce pretty nicely. Some of them don't really. And then I think in Death Valley, we see slightly larger ones. And then the other group that fluoresce beautifully is the millipedes. So we have these flat back millipedes in the Bay Area that are mostly, we mostly see them in redwood forests on kind of wet, damp night. And then you might see dozens of them. And it's just amazing when you turn off your regular light and you turn on the UV light, you might find that there's just so many of them all around, and it's beautiful to see them. This is how they look like in regular light. So again, without the UV light, it would be very difficult to find something like that. And that's another species of millipede that also fluoresce very nicely. This is the same one. And I think it's actually a pair mating. And then sometimes centipedes fluoresce a bit, but usually they don't stay long enough for you to find out. They'll, you know, take off quickly. And even a Jerusalem cricket might look interesting under UV light. But again, nothing like the scorpions and the flatback millipedes. And then one year we had this awesome surprise in Death Valley. So while looking for scorpions right next to our campsite, I saw this gecko. So this is the desert banded gecko, which is I don't know if common, but sometimes we see it in Death Valley. And apparently they fluoresce as well. And they just look like a special Halloween creature, you know, it's just amazing. Let me play you a short video here. Yes, please. Okay. So yeah, look at that. So yeah, this is the gecko from Death Valley, and I think they're just beautiful. And then if you like tide pooling, you might want to try tide pooling at night, because some of the critters you see during the day, they actually fluoresce in UV, like sea anemones and some of the shells and hermit crabs, they fluoresce beautifully as well. And then even some plants fluoresce in UV light. We were surprised in some of these night hikes to find that some plants fluoresce. And we were always, you know, thinking we should one day do nighttime weeding, because if you look in the middle photo, this is the notorious Italian thistle. And I think pulling the little baby Italian thistles at night might be much more pleasant than pulling their, you know, grandparents in the middle of a hot summer night. So, you know, just something to keep in mind. But anyway, even the plants look awesome. But it's not just things that fluoresce in UV light. Some insects actually produce light. So they glow in the dark without any interference. And unfortunately, in California, we don't have very exciting, you know, fireflies like in the East Coast and in other places. But we do have some glowworms, and I don't know if you could see it in the photo. I had to add this circle so I won't forget to show you that this is a California, this is a glowworm right here, okay? So this is one of our exciting species. No, I mean, they are exciting, they are very cool. This is what it looks like. So this is a little beetle. This is either the female or the larva. Their biology is pretty bizarre. So the larva and the female look the same. The female is just larger. I guess an expert could tell if this is a female or a larva. I'm not sure. I think it's a female. The adult male looks completely different. And then the larva and the female, they produce some light. And the male sometimes, depending on the species, might produce light. These are predatory beetles. Okay, so this little thing is a beetle. And they like eating millipedes. And when they catch a millipede and bite it in the neck or something, they will make a hole and crawl into the millipede and eat it from the inside, emptying it, which sounds kind of cool and another great Halloween story. And then this is the adult of a different species of a glowworm that we have here in the Bay Area. It has amazing antenna, and this is the male, okay? The female looks like that little worm that we saw in the previous slide. There are a few different species, so the larva form might look a bit different, but the biology is similar. Yeah, I think these are really bizarre beetles. And the other group that can glow and produce light is the fireflies, which unfortunately, most of our fireflies are actually the diurnal fireflies. They're active during the day, so there's no need to produce any light. Like this one in the middle here, California glowworm, which is actually not a glowworm, it's a firefly. I wonder why it's so confusing, you know, common names are interesting. But anyway, we have a few different species in the area and about 20 species in California in general. And yeah, and the adults look like that. I think both the male and the female. And in some species, they produce a bit of light, but not that much. So I guess you'll have to travel somewhere else if you want to see very exciting fireflies. But on the right season, which I think is in the middle of the summer, our friends Debbie Brusco and Jacko Wiki usually organize this awesome night hike in Montebello, looking for glowworms and fireflies and other things. And if we're lucky, we will see these little guys there. So, you know, maybe next summer, everything will be back to normal and we'll be able to go out together again. So what could you do if you want to see all these cool, amazing critters? You could go and explore your campsite at night. If you're already out there, just take a flashlight with red tape, without a red tape, just go out, get your kids. Kids find it amazing to be out at night. It's just so exciting, and there's so much you could see. And then you could turn your flashlight off and just look at the stars and listen to all the animals. It's just beautiful. And then you could explore your yard. So these are things I found in my backyard a couple of weeks ago. If you go for a little walk at night, you might see all sorts of exciting things happening on the sidewalk, like, you know, slugs and snails and ants and beetles and crickets. And then one day, when back to normal, so Grassroots Ecology has some awesome night hikes, as well as Mid-Peninsula Open Space District. And you could also participate in Moth Week events, which happen, I think, in July, like the end of July every year, I think. So you could put moth light on, which is basically hanging a white sheet and bringing either black light, UV light, or regular light to attract moth, but lots of other insects as well. And that's a great way to learn about them. And that's it. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Awesome.
And now I'll stop sharing so we could chat. Whoops.
Yeah.
This one.
Let's
Okay.
give a round of applause for Marav and Shelley for taking us on that adventure. Great. I know we have some more questions in the chat. Kathleen, do you mind sharing those?
Yep. So I'm going to go back to, I think like the beginning of the queue was from Lewis with the question, do centipedes use the legs on the end of their body to attack prey?
That's a great question. So I think those legs or tails or whatever you want to call them, I think they mostly use them to actually confuse their predators, because if you notice, their head and their tail look very similar. So a predator might try to get them, like attack them on their tail instead of their head, and they could survive that, other than if they were attacked in their head. They can't actually use that to attack their prey, because their maxillipedes, those, you know, specialized jaws are in the front, right next to their mouth.
Okay, we had one about the frogs. We had a question from John. Are there other frogs that sound like the red-legged frog? Or if you hear that sound, I guess, do you know if you have them locally?
So the frog that I played was, I think, mostly the Sierra tree frog. It wasn't the red-legged frog. It might have been there together. I think I mostly heard one type of call, but I'm definitely not an expert. So I think I have a few different recordings, and I think in some of them you could hear different kind of calls. But most of what we heard there was probably the tree frog, which was the little one with a big sack. And there were red-legged frogs in that area, so they might have been calling at the same time. So different species, well, maybe to answer that question, different species will have different kind of call. And in different books, they would, you know, describe what it sounds like, but I think it's very difficult to understand something from that. So I would look for like recordings online.
Yeah. Online, they do have recordings of the frogs. You can go in and listen to them. So just put in red-legged frog, go listen. It's
yeah, I
different.
think this is John. I when I heard your I saw your picture of the red-legged frog, and I heard it, and it sounded like all the ones I have nearby my house. So they were tree frogs. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly.
They were tree frogs.
Okay, here's a big one. And it's a question that is probably on a lot of people's minds. What about these organisms fluorescing? This is from Rona. What's the what are some hypotheses about why these animals spend that energy on fluorescing?
Okay, so yeah, that is a really good question. One that I think we don't really have an answer for. So people discovered that scorpions fluoresce in UV, I think like 70 years ago, something like that, some decades ago. But although there have been different studies, we don't really know why they do it. So almost all scorpions do that, other than one family probably that doesn't. Most of them do fluoresce. One study that I saw said that they can detect UV light, so that, or at least the scorpions that they studied can detect UV light, which means that they thought maybe it's good for them to avoid being eaten by other scorpions, so they want to keep their distance, because most of these predatory animals, they don't want to be near another one of their kind unless they need to mate. So they want to keep their distance, and that would be a good way to, see if there's another scorpion nearby. And another thing is when they're looking for a mate, it would be easier to find one. I don't know if that's correct. It was a little study that was published some years ago. I'm not sure.
Let's see, we have a comment from Vivian that some crab spiders fluoresce, and you can find them on garden flowers at night. That's a great tip.
Yeah.
Shelley or Marav, are there any other spiders that we should be looking at for fluorescing?
I don't remember seeing any spiders fluorescing, I think. As far as I can remember, I haven't seen any. But it doesn't mean that they don't exist. I mean, the thing with the scorpions is that almost all of them do it. But with other groups, you might find one that does. Like I saw some caterpillars, like moth caterpillars that fluoresce pretty nicely. And, some random organisms. But it's not like the whole group fluoresce, and it's not that bright and that strong.